Panel isn't very big in numbers, but quality is more important than quantity. So please welcome Sofia Tchouikina, Tatiana Voronina, and Tadeusz Kwiatkowski, who will be Piotr Tadeusz Kwiatkowski, I'm sorry, who will be the commentator for the panel today. And we shall start with a presentation by Sofia Tchouikina from University of Paris, and the title is How the Presence of Religion is Shaping Commemoration, the Centenary of the First World War in Russia in 2014. Sofia Tchouikina has got a PhD in sociology. She's an associate professor at the Department of Slavic Studies of the University of Paris. And her PhD thesis was devoted to family memory, and especially to the memory of the 1920s and 1930s in the Russian noble families. Currently, she's doing her research on history, museums, and historical exhibitions in Russia. And her research is about the centenary of the First World War in Russia, which is a part of an international research project revisiting commemoration, practices, uses, and appropriation of the centenary of the Great War. And a part of this research shall be presented today. The floor is yours, and because you're going to use a lot of visual materials, maybe we shall move to the first row. It's okay for you?
Hello, I'm very happy to speak here today. I would like to thank the organizers of the conference, especially Susanna Bogomil, who is creating links between Russia and Poland, Poland and France, in the domains of sociology of memory and sociology of religion. It is very great to discuss these issues today. And in fact, I will talk about the centenary of the First World War. It was an international event, and more than 30 countries took part in it. That is why it is a very interesting case for studying the impact of religion on memory, because in some countries the activities of the church and the state were closely related. And in some other countries, they were separated. So I was participating in an international research project revisiting commemoration. I was especially interested in historical exhibitions and history museums, but I also studied other events of the centenary, like the inauguration of the new monuments or historical reconstructions. In Russia, the centenary was state-organized and state-sponsored, so the initiative came from the top, but of course there were other important actors of this event: Russian Orthodox Church, memorial associations, museums, mass media. The decision of the government to invest in that national commemoration can be explained by the fact that the political regime is actually constructing national identity of Russia on patriotic and heroic narrative. And there is the intention to create a continuity between the military experiences of Imperial Russia and the present day. So especially they are constructing now this symbolic continuity between Napoleonic Wars, the First World War, and the Second World War, and maybe the present day. So the ideological goal of the centenary for the state was to reinterpret the First World War, to create and promote a new historical interpretation. The previous Soviet interpretation was that war was useless, anti-national, and that its only historical impact was that later there was the October Revolution. And now there is this new interpretation. The Tsar, the latest Tsar is shown as someone peaceful. He's also shown as a very important reunification figure for the nation and the army. And also during the centenary, the victories of the Russian Imperial Army in the war were very much described. And the most important conclusion was that Russia did not lose the war. The Imperial Russia nearly won the war, but the war was stolen by the traitors, Bolsheviks. The Orthodox religion as an integral part of life of society and of the army was also shown very positively. And it was very clear that the state wanted to show the church as an important partner of the strong state and of the strong army. Before I will pass to the use of religious symbols and religious language by all the actors of the centenary, I would like to give my hypothesis or my explanations why religion was important during this jubilee. The religious aspects were important, first of all, because there was the necessity to emotionalize the forgotten war and to create the illusion of a living memory. In fact, the particularity of Russian commemoration was that this war in Russia, in the Soviet Union, was really forgotten, not only on the state level, but also on the level of family memory. It is for the first time that this war was commemorated in Russia. And so it was necessary to attract the indifferent audience to this event. And in order to attract this audience, I think it was useful to create emotion, where, in fact, there was no emotion. So here we can say that for sociology of memory, indeed, this jubilee is very interesting because here we see the intention to create a new memory where there is nothing. So I have a hypothesis on the basis of my field research that the creation of a new memory of event necessitates the emotionalization. And the second reason why religion was important, it is because all active participants of the centenary wanted to find something that they could sanctify, perceive as sacred. This search for the sacred is explained by the fact that there is the idea that Russian nation, lost something very important because of this brutal end of the old regime and the brutal end of the war. And that is why it is necessary to symbolically connect to this old regime. And this connection should be not only intellectual, but also emotional. And that is why sacred objects, sacred spaces can be important in this process. So now, after this long introduction, let's see what were doing the actors of the centenary. So Russian Orthodox Church was participating really very actively. I want to say that in general, Russian Orthodox Church participate very actively in memorial politics and in creation of memory in the last years. But there will be other presentations about that, and I will not talk about it. In this 100th anniversary of the First World War, they had two goals. First of all, they wanted to legitimize a recent reform, that is the introduction of chaplains in the contemporary Russian army. Because, in fact, the Patriarch Kirill he obtained from the President Medvedev in 2009 the introduction of the positions of priests in the army, so the positions financed by the state. And of course, this reform, it is quite a lot criticized by the society. And so for the church, it's quite important to legitimize this reform and to show that the role of the church in the army is important. And so the memory of the First World War here is a very good occasion to publicize the heroic exploits of the regimental priests during the First World War. That is why the institutions belonging to the Orthodox Church, they published really a lot of articles on their internet sites where they explained the everyday life of the priests, what difficulties and difficult and extraordinary conditions of work, of course, and all their heroic deeds and the canonization of some of the heroes of the First World War. The second goal of the Orthodox Church in this centenary was to sacralize some urban space and reappropriate these urban spaces. So one very interesting example is the reappropriation by the church of the park. So in Moscow there is a park called Sokol. It was created in the 1950s on the place of the former military cemetery. And already in the 90s, a small chapel was constructed there, Transfiguration Chapel. And from 2014, the church is really very active there. The Patriarch Kirill himself, in the beginning of August, he officiated a service to the warriors of the motherland. Then in 1915, they brought to this chapel a capsule with the soil from Gumbinin. So it is the only battle site in Russia of the First World War. So they brought soil from there, saying that this is the soil covered by the blood of Russian warriors. Also, they brought there the mortuary urn of the great Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, who was the commandant of the Russian army in 1914. And finally, already in 2017, they organized the requiem during 3 days, where 18,000 names were pronounced, 18,000 names of those who were buried in this cemetery. So by all this action, the church wants to show that this is a sacred space, and this space cannot be occupied by leisure centers, shops, and there is a kind of a conflict now between the church and the authorities of the city of Moscow because of this space. Several associations in Russia, even if there are very few, consecrate their activities to the memory of the First World War. And of course, they used the centenary as a very good occasion to promote their activities. The memorial activists are close to the Orthodox Church in many ways. First of all, they publicly acknowledge their own Orthodox belonging. Also, they collaborate with the church on many occasions. For instance, they are very active in the church media. For instance, the radio of St. Petersburg Metropolia, Grad Petrov, there very often we can hear all kind of interventions of these memorial activists. Second, they were collaborating with the church in some memorialization projects. They opened 2 monuments during the centenary, a monument to the veterans of the First World War who were victims of the Stalinist repressions, together with the church memorial society and associations for the memory of the First World War. And second monument, it was a monument to regimental priests, so both in St. Petersburg. Also, these memorial activists are close to the church in that their attitude to the Soviet period is very negative. So in that they are different from the Ministry of Culture, for instance, and from museums. Their attitude to the Soviet period is not as negative. But the associations for the memory of the First World War, their attitude is very negative to the Soviet project. And also, they developed the idea that if Russian society wants to acquire a profound understanding of this war, and if it wants to reappropriate a heroic legacy of this war, so it is necessary, first of all, to repent for the sins of the previous generations. So repent for the oblivion, for the fact that this war was forgotten. So in using this terminology of repentance, of course, this also is kind of a quasi-religious discourse. And also another idea that they developed, that we need to understand the contemporaries of the war. So that is, understand the mentality of those who were in the France, and also the mentality of the civil population. And for them, as the contemporaries of the war were very profoundly religious, or at least had this faith, so for them, being in the army, it is the same thing as have faith. So these two things are very intimately related for them. So this special understanding of the war is linked to the understanding what it means to be religious. Also, a very important part of the activities of these associations is to take care of the military graves. So for them, the fact that these military graves were not enough maintained, it is also a sin that, and if we repent for the oblivion, we need to take care of the graves. Now museums. So the museum exhibition presented in more or less detailed way the role of the church in the army, the faith in the army, and all kind of beliefs. So all these topics were in more or less detailed presented. And there were a lot of religious objects that could be observed in the museums. For instance, clothes or habits of the chaplains, or portable objects of these priests, or for instance, regimental icons, or photographs from the France, or documents issued by the church authorities. And all these objects could be presented in two different ways. Either they were presented as exhibits, or they were presented as symbols. For me, as observer, it was always very, very easy to understand where they were presented as exhibit or as symbol. Because when a religious object, for instance, an icon, is presented as an exhibit, it means it is contextualized. It means there is a very long explanation what is the origin of this object, how it was used, why, for instance, they believed in it, and so on. And this contextualization, of course, they desacralized this object, transformed it in an ordinary exhibit. And when this regimental icon was just met on the wall, like, for instance, here, you see, this is a museum, the icons of the wall. So it is a symbol. So why museums needed religious symbols? In fact, museums were quite in dialogue with the official politics of the state. And so they were especially working with one idea of the state ideology, that this war, it was a great forgotten war, and we should bring it back to national historical memory. And the museums were rarely talking about repentance, sometimes, but very rarely. But they were using a similar concept of the debt of memory. Well, of course, the debt of memory is a concept which is used all over the world, of course. But, of course, we can use it in different ways. So, museums can understand their mission in different ways, and they can work with the past in different ways. Either we can bring it back in an emotional, memorial manner, for instance, or we can bring it back in a historical way, more analytical, distant way. And so those museums in Russia who have chosen this emotional, memorial way of presentation of the First World War, they needed also religious objects as symbols. So what it means present the First World War as an emotional memorial way? It means to show that this memory is very important now. It is a living memory, like a burning memory, something which is important for us today. Of course, it is not true, but some museums wanted to show it in this way. And so what were they doing? They were, for instance, creating some particular memorial spaces at the exhibitions, like spaces that resembled to the chapels. For instance, in Moscow, one exhibition called Entente in Tsaritsino, it was a very well-financed project, exhibition, and so they created the last hall, which was called Memory Room. So in this hall, there were gathered all kinds of photographs, personal documents of people, so it was a room that showed the war through personal stories, and there were candles all along the wall. So this is, I think, for me, is religious connotations. Also, if museums did not have money for this scenography, they just put icons on the walls. Or, for instance, this is a new museum of the First World War near St. Petersburg, where they met. It is the ceiling, in fact. So they met on the ceiling a very huge representation of Christ. And so we understand. So by this action, they, I think, I don't know what is the meaning exactly. It should be researched more, but I think they sacralized the museum space. And last but not least, some museums, they really collaborated with the church. So they invited the church to take part in their cultural programs. For instance, in one of the museums in St. Petersburg, where exactly it is the museum of a Commandant Suvorov, so the opening of an exhibition, there was a memorial service performed by the archimandrite, so a representative of the church responsible for spiritual work with the army. And this archimandrite in his speech said, "With this prayer, the sacred memory comes back to the sacred walls." So we see that this ceremony, it was a means of sacralization of the museum space. Now, there were, of course, many ideas. There were two ideas more or less linked to the religious problematic. So one idea that Russia needs a national reconciliation, and the national reconciliation that would be a symbolic return to the point of national unity, that is 1914. Historically, it is not true that it was a point of national unity, but it is an idea, which is more or less common for all actors of the centenary. And the second idea, it is the necessity to repair the historical and memorial ruptures of the Soviet period. So some of them call it repentance, others call it the debt of memory. So now to conclude how the presence of religion is shaping commemoration. So first of all, Centenary was emotional, so they tried to create the emotion where there was no emotion at the beginning. Then not much place was for professional history and analytical approach. So the return of the memory of that war was effectuated in emotional, not so much historical and analytical way. And then one of the results is a complete rehabilitation of the figure of the Tsar and of the church as actors of internal politics. Some sociologists claim that Russia is going through a process of desecularization. According to Vyacheslav Karpov, it has 4 dimensions. So it's the influence of religiosity on the public institutions, on public discourse, on culture and practices. So my research of Centenary, in fact, shows that this process of desecularization is very slowly going on, because I observed, as I showed, some influence of religious language on museum, some influence of religious language on historical writing, even if I did not talk about it, but it exists, the presence of religious discourses and symbols in the public space. But what concerns the practices of the population, I think that the impact is very limited. Well, of course, I did not study it enough to claim it really, but I was talking in the museums with people and asking questions and so on. What I noticed that people are perceiving, ordinary audience is perceiving the First World War through the lens of the Second World War, because they know much about the First World War. And whenever question I asked about the First World War, they immediately mobilized their knowledge about the Second World War. And so that is why they are much more sensitive to the idea of the state of the heroization. They understand very well that Russian nation was a heroic nation and Russian army was a strong, heroic army, but they are not interested, not sensitive of this idea, for instance, of repentance or return to faith. But it is to be continued. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess we'll discuss after the presentation, okay? Thank you very much for this presentation, and it is my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Tatiana Voronina from the University of Zurich. She's a historian interested in social and cultural history of the late Soviet Union, also memory studies and oral history. She holds a PhD degree from European University at St. Petersburg, and she's a book review editor in Laboratorium, Russian Review of the Social Studies. Since 2017, she's involved in the collaborative project called the Late Soviet Village People, Institution, and Things between the socialist cult of urbanity and the ruralization of urban lifestyles at the University of Zurich. And she also participates in a collaborative project From Enemy to New Martyr, which is sponsored by our Polish National Science Center. Tatiana Voronina is the author of the monograph Remembering the Russian Way, Socialist Historicism and the Siege of Leningrad, published this year. And today she'll give a talk entitled A Time of Persecution or A Time of Glory, the Russian Orthodox Church celebration of the 100th anniversary of the 1917 revolutions. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for presentation, and I just want to start with say that it's a privilege for me to be here and to participate in such a nice conference, and also many thanks for organizers of this event. And my presentation, the title of my presentation is here, and I apologize, I prefer to read just to be in time, and it's better way to say all what I would like to say, no more. As we all know, the jubilees play an important role in the formation of historical memory. So tell me what and how you commemorate, and I'll tell you who you are. So the 2017 anniversary of the Russian Revolution may help us to see the changes of the country's historical policy. As you know, for the USSR, the day of October Revolution was the main Soviet holiday underlying the legitimacy of the Soviet power. The heroes of the revolution and the civil war were the national heroes through the years of the Soviet time. And the collapse of the Soviet Union, the attitude toward the October Revolution changed. The authorities tried to replace the 7th of November, so the day of beginning of October Revolution, to the day of a national unity celebrated on the 4th of November since 2005. One may wonder about the meaning of the revolution for the modern Russian society, which on the one hand built the continuity with the Soviet achievement and on the other hand tries to comprehend the most violent communist rule, for instance, repression. So what kind of interpretation of Russia's history in the 20th century are being offered to the modern Russians by the main agents of memory? So my colleagues and I tried to investigate such problem and launched the project. The title of this already was mentioned. But actually, I'm glad that it's a project leading my colleagues and good friends, Zuzana Bogumil, and I'm also happy that it's not just my presentation of this project. We also would hear another presentations. And so we are interested in how the Russian Orthodox Church united the history of revolution, the persecution of the Church, and the Soviet success into a single narrative. Why is this version of the past is so much demand among the contemporary Russian authority? So my paper presents only a part of this project, and I will focus on analyzing the 2017 anniversary event organized by the Russian Orthodox Church and present in the meaning they were assigned. And now, first of all, I would like to say a few words about the Orthodox Church as one of the actors of the memory. Unlike other actors of memory, the Russian Orthodox Church has a number of specific features. The main features, it's not all, but one of the main is, first of all, it's a specific language and calendar, different from the secular language and holidays in contemporary Russia. Another specific is that the Russian Orthodox Church have a special form of commemoration adopted only by church. So they have the church service and procession, worship of relics, lives of science, and so on. And third, they have own memory infrastructure, like memorable days, memorials, own book publishing houses, Orthodox media, and so on. So the Russian Orthodox Church has objectively difficulties in representing its version of the historical past because the majority of the Russian population, maybe it will be surprised, but are not religious. So many modern Russians do not understand the language of the church. They do not read the lives of science. They do not attend church service and listen to sermons. So they are not familiar with the church holidays. For this reason, the policy of the Russian Orthodox Church is designed for the two target groups, believers who are churchgoers and everyone else. So in order to understand it, the logic of the Russian Orthodox Church is in identification of significant dates and events of the Jubilee years. I will briefly describe how the Russian Orthodox Church interprets the revolutionary events. For this, I will mention the speech of Patriarch Kirill addresses to the topic throughout the years, but the position of the Russian Orthodox Church was most fully expressed in Patriarch Kirill's speeches in the opening of the 25th International Christmas Educational Readings. So the speech was in a kind of manifest that explained the significance of the Russian Orthodox Church in the history of the 20th century in Russia. So as you see here, so that the main claims made in the Patriarch's speech were the following. So first of all, the main reason of the revolution was the people, especially the elites, rejected the Orthodox faith. The second, the civil war and the Soviet repression at the Great Patriotic War, which is the Patriarch combined together in his speech, were intended to bring people back to the Christianity. So the believers and clergymen who died during the Soviet repression and the revolutionary time, and who later was sacrificed and became new martyrs and confessors, are heroes of the Russia, who didn't give up their faith and in this way saved the country's chance to salvation. They place in the next to the heroes of the war and the heroes of the labor. The renewal of the Patriarch in the local church council, Pomestny Sabor, was the first victory over the revolutionary house. The figure of the Patriarch Tikhon is a hero, and the new martyrs is the key figure of the epoch, calling people to unite and refrain from resistance their authorities. Despite the official atheism in the state and the society is in the post-war period, Russia has always been a deeply religious country, which enabled to have achievements in various fields of culture and science. And in the end, So therefore, the Russian Orthodox Church is the only social institution that has not lost continuity throughout the history of Russia. So the Russian Orthodox Church is here in the Russian tradition. So what did the Russian Orthodox Church commemorate during the Jubilee years in the 2017? In the speeches of the Diocese Assembly of the City of Moscow in December of 2017, the Patriarch Kirill described the years as follows: as a joyful jubilee marked the start of the local church council and the beginning of the Tikhon as a patriarch, and the sad 100th anniversary of the beginning of persecution against the church associated with the revolution. On the 1st of February in 2017, the Russian Orthodox Church established their organizing committee to implement the program of the church-wide event marking the 100th anniversary of the beginning of persecution of the Russian Orthodox Church. The committee included 24 people and headed by Metropolitan Juvenali of Kutitske Kolonna. The appointment of this hierarch was certainly not accident. He is the head of the Church and Society Council of Commemorated of New Martyrs and Confessors of the Russian Church. And let me remind you that the new martyrs and the confessors are a group of the Orthodox clergy believers who fell victim of the political terror and were canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church abroad in the late 20th century and early 21st century. Okay, so what kind of event? It's an icon of new martyrs and the confessors, one of the probably most famous imagination. Okay, what kind of commemorative event the Russian Orthodox Church choose? The first of all, in the 9th of March of the Holy Synod approved the event program prepared by the organizing committee. So the following achievements were planned. So one of the main and one of the beginning of this jubilee was an event of the 50th of March in 2017. So on the day of abdication of Tsar Nicholas II and the appearance of a sovereign icon of the Mother of God, Patriarch Kirill celebrated a liturgy in the church in Kazan, icon of the Mother of God in Kolomenskoye in Moscow. Then it was on the 25th of May in 2017. It was planned that a new church would be blessed and dedicated to the new martyrs and the confessors in the Stretinsky Monastery in Lubyanka. So this is an official photo from this event. So this coincided with the celebration of the 10th anniversary of the restoration of unity within the Russian Orthodox Church and the Moscow Patriarchate with the Russian Orthodox Church abroad. On the 6th of June in 2017, as a part of the Jubilees, the church conference was held in the Cathedral of the Christ of the Savior, entitled the 100th anniversary of the beginning of persecution of Russian Orthodox Church. So the conference was opened by Patriarch with the speeches of significance of a revolution for history of the 20th century Russia. On the 18th of November in 2017, on the 100th anniversary of the election of Patriarch Tikhon, Patriarch Kirill celebrated liturgy in the great cathedral of Donskoy Staroprigel Men's Monastery in Moscow. And on the 27th of November in 2017, on the convocation of the Consecrated Bishops' Council of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill opened a conference entitled The Murder of the Tsar Family, New Examination and Archival Materials in the Sretinsky Theological Seminary. So the Jubilee was summarized by the Council of Archbishop scheduled to consider with the 100th anniversary of the restoration of Patriarchate. The council was held from the 29th of November to the 2nd of December. In addition, the official event prepared by the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church, the diocese also held the conference devoted to the central persecution of the church, and to honor to the jubilee years, many dozens in Russia and neighboring countries hosted an ark with the relic of the new martyrs. So the anniversary of the Patriarchate is a significant project for the church, and the glorification of the new martyrs as Russia's heroes became the project target at the Russian society at all. Therefore, the Patriarch Kirill participated not only in a church event, but also in an important state-level event prepared by a special official state committee set up in commemorate the revolution. So the most important of this event were follows. So the opening of the Wall of the Sorrow, so this is a new memorial, and on the 30th of October in 2017, together with the President Putin, and participation in the Days of Remembrance, organized the anniversary of the February Revolution with the participation of Russia's Minister of Culture, Vladimir Medinsky. Well, what kind of meaning did the Russian Orthodox Church attach the anniversary of the revolution? So what was the supposed lesson, the Russian Revolution? Why is this abdicated of Nicholas II and the beginning of the Patriarchate is so important for the modern Russian Orthodox Church? The state authorities saw the main meaning of the jubilees is an idea of a national unity, which is in the opposite to the split between the different social groups in modern Russia. So the Russian Orthodox Church widely supported this interpretation in challenged the Marxist idea of the class society and regarded to the struggle for power as one of the most dangerous phenomena. Within the Russian Orthodox Church, the idea of the unity of the nation was epitomized by the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the local church council and the election of a Patriarch Tikhon. In the opinion of the Russian Orthodox Church, the revival of the Patriarchate helped to consolidate the Russian society. Second, the anniversary of the revolution, and especially the 100th anniversary of the local church council, were utilized to boost the influence of a Russian Orthodox Church in the life of the modern Russia. The Orthodox Church sees itself as one of the main institutions in the country. According to the Clear, the Russian Orthodox Church is the core of the Russian civilization. They bear the tradition of the Russian people. In the opinion of the Clear, the 1970s revolution proved the right of the Russian Orthodox Church to play this role. The persecution of the Church during the revolution and the Great Terror allowed the Russian Orthodox Church to draw direct parallels between the early years of Christianity and the history of the 20th century. The martyrdom of the Russian Orthodox Church became a prologue to its greatness. So this was the logic of commemorative events. Throughout the Jubilee years, the Russian Orthodox Church stressed the anti-church focus on the October Revolution and the special role of believers and hierarchy as of its victims. The fact of faith is well known to Christians is not understandable or obvious to secular minds. The absence of the bright heroic deed committed by the potential heroes as a sacrifice in the name of God rather than something more tangible, and make the creation of the new heroic phenomenon problematic. Therefore, the ideologists who want to passive this project in the future believe it could be continued through the educational program for the young people. So the Russian Orthodox Church seeks to involve young people in the church and turn them into believers. And once this is achieved, the problem of explanation for the explaining the martyr's feat will disappear. And then, 30. The anniversary of the revolution was used by the Russian Orthodox Church in order to present and justify Orthodox Christianity as the only true system of values and guidance of the Russian society, and to oppose it to the Western values. In the opposite of the Russian Orthodox Church, the Orthodox faith is the one which is associated with the national roots and traditions, and that is why Orthodox should share patriotic attitudes and love for the homeland. The new martyrs did not just suffer for the Orthodox faith, they did it for love of the homeland. In the opinion of the Russian Orthodox Church, the scale of the Soviet repression, which led to a large number of the new martyrs, testified that Russia has chosen by God. So it was Russia that became the channel for the Davin plan. So the revolution of the 1970s, interpreted by the Russian Orthodox Church as a tragedy, is also a beginning of the fear for the new martyrs. At the same time, it is also a time when the Russia was glorified on its way to worldwide fame. So the Soviet success in the field of science and culture are attributed exclusively to Russia and save the evidence of the religions of Russia's population. Then going to conclusion. So the anniversary of the Russian Revolution was the act of the public reinterpretation of the event of the 1970s, when a completely new version of event was proposed to replace the Soviet interpretation, which completely knew significant dates and the heroes of past. The Russian Orthodox Church had a great influence on this understanding of the past. Its interpretation is based on an idea of revolution as a national disaster that Russia managed to survive and overcome thanks to the achievement of the Russian Orthodox Church and the faith of the new martyrs. The anniversary of the Patriarch's participation in a commemorative event and the exhibition Russia in My History helped to make this interpretation public and more visible in the society, thus straightening the role of the Russian Orthodox Church in the new ideological construct used by the modern authorities in Russia. At the same time, the scandal that accompanied the anniversary, for instance, the public discussion about film Matilda, the public protest against the transfer of Isakievsky Cathedral from museum to Russian Orthodox Church, suggest that essentially not everyone in Russia agree with such position. Thank you very much.
And now let me please introduce briefly the commentator of the panel today, Professor Piotr Kwiatkowski, sociologist, currently a professor of sociology at the University of Social Sciences and Humanities in Warsaw, who is well known for his sociological investigation of vernacular collective memory. And he recently has published a book, or is it in press?
It's in press.
It's in press, okay. Odzyskanie niepodległości w pamięci zbiorowej polskiego społeczeństwa, Regaining the Independence in Collective Memory of the Polish Society, Warsaw 2018. So we're waiting for that. The floor is yours, and so is the microphone.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank Sofia and Tatiana for so interesting presentations, actually stressing two sides of a very similar phenomenon in the area of collective memory in Russia. And those presentations actually were concentrated on historical content in public debates in contemporary Russia. However, the problems covered by both speakers are definitely wider, and they are discussed in many European countries, including Poland. The First World War in many countries still is the reason for public commemorations and debates, and in many countries, for example, Austria, Hungary or Germany, the war was a very traumatic experience connected with the fall of former empires, fall of former established symbolic systems, but also with loss of past international position. In other countries, the end of the war was or is celebrated as a victory. For example, in such countries in Central Europe like Poland, Baltic states, Finland, Czechoslovakia, now the Czech and Slovak republics, end of the war is celebrated as a new chapter in their history, the beginning of an independent existence. Sometimes it means that end of the war is important, while the war itself is really neglected and forgotten in some Central European societies. And case of Russia is very special. And as Sofia stressed in 2014, the Great War was commemorated for the first time in the history of the country. So the Russian society did not have any tradition of remembering this war, and this memory was totally erased by the memory of the revolution and the civil war 1917-1921. So propaganda developed by the Bolsheviks and continued by the Soviet authorities imposed the kind of worship of the October Revolution and its heroes, obviously Lenin, but later Stalin, also Dzerzhinsky. So people from, let us say, older generation like me, living in former Soviet bloc, still remember the really great celebrations of the anniversaries of the so-called Great October Socialist Revolution that happened in November 1917. And I remember that in 1967 or 1977, those celebrations were really very great and overwhelming all the media in all countries that belong to the same political bloc. Also, I remember that 1970 was declared in the Soviet Union and in its satellite countries as the Lenin year. And it was just a great celebration of, I would say, Lenin's birthday, or 100th centenary of Lenin's birthday. So nowadays in Russia, the heritage of October Revolution is very problematic. During the first Congress of the Memory Studies Association in Copenhagen in December 2017, I had an opportunity to listen to a very interesting paper about the fact that Russia practically did not officially celebrate the centenary of the revolution. The paper presented by Tatiana shows that such an anniversary took place. However, the celebrations were of very special character. The Russian Orthodox Church actually filled the social gap, or the gap in social communication, and took the initiative and became a very important active agent in the field of memory, and propagated a black legend, the image of the 1917 revolutions, as a bad time of destruction, chaos and fight against religion. That's striking, but in Poland, the right-wing parties and the Catholic Church still, just now, promote the negative narratives about the revolutionary events that took place in Poland in 1905-1907. Another interesting subject, that in democratic countries, natural process of collective memory development is, as J. Winter says, a shift from communicative memory, that of lived experience, to cultural memory, that of imagined experience. After the revolution, there was organized forgetting. So everything that happened in 1914, 1917 was practically removed, was practically banned from the public debate. So the Bolsheviks have taken steps to prevent the development of spontaneous communicative memory of the Great War, I mean the First World War. Therefore, the important historical events and experience fell into oblivion, and in the second decade of the 21st century, Russia returns to events from a century ago. New narratives about war are constructed by politicians and specialists in the area of ideology, in close cooperation with top officials and intellectuals connected with the Orthodox Church. In this way, the discussion about the war actually avoided its victims, avoided destruction, avoided all traumatic experience. Let's use Winter's term once again. The sacred memory regime was imposed upon the society. So the Great War became the material of the story about powerful, eternal Russian Empire and its great army. A lot is said in this story about Orthodox Christianity, treated as an important factor of social integration and national identity. Thus, in such an interpretation, the Orthodox Christianity, as Tatiana said, is the only true system of values and guidance in the Russian society, and to oppose it to the Western culture and Western values. In Central Europe countries, celebrations of anniversaries of the First World War and of the end of the First World War are of different nature. In Czechoslovakia, for example, and later in the Czech Republic, all state holidays and celebrations are very secular. In Poland, on the other hand, there is religious symbolism and stressing that the Catholic Christianity is a very important factor shaping national identity. However, the Church does not dominate during European celebrations of the early 20th century. Thank you.
Would any of the speakers like to respond directly to the commentary? No? So, later. Okay, so the floor is open for the direct questions from the audience, and there are some microphones there, okay? So just raise your hands and ask your questions.
Thank you. My name is Elina Kahla. I come from University of Helsinki, Finland. I thank for the opportunity to be here and for listening to your excellent presentations on commemorating the important dates. I would like to ask both Sofia Tchouikina and Tatiana Voronina, what is the theme for the official commemoration with all its symbols and symphony between the Russian Orthodox Church and secular administration? What is the nominator and symbol theme for the next year? Thank you.
Great question, thank you. Maybe we'll collect some more and then respond to 3 or 4 of them. So could you pass the mic here?
Oh, I take it back to you. Thank you very much. My name is Grace Davey and I come from UK. I'm really delighted to be here and listening to this debate. I have 3 questions. Please don't feel that you have to answer all of them, but it's made me curious. One is, I would like to know a little bit more about religious minorities. We've heard a great deal about the Russian Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church in Poland, how this has affected and in what way religious minorities. The second is, where does President Putin place himself in these shifting debates? And the third one is a slightly different question. I was really interested in the use of artifact and artistic dimensions in these celebrations. Could any of you say anything about music? I appreciate there's a lot of questions there. Please take them as you wish.
Thank you. Ekaterina Klimenko, Institute of Philosophy and Sociology, Polish Academy of Sciences. Thank you very much, both of you, for this very interesting and thought-provoking presentations. And I have 2 questions, one for Sofia and the other one for Tatiana. So my question for Sofia is related to the segment of your paper where you discussed Russian Orthodox Church as an actor in this broad field of memory. So as far as I understood, you were looking into official church memory, so to speak. Did you have any chance to look at vernacular memory projects, grassroots projects within this Orthodox tradition? Were there any? If you can elaborate just on this a little bit. And my question to Tatiana, Sofia used the concept of desecularization to speak of what is happening with the memory of World War I. So could we use the same concept to talk about the memory of the revolution? And if it is indeed desecularization, is it desecularization from above, or is it desecularization from below as well? Thank you very much.
Okay, we already have a lot of questions, so maybe not to lose the track of them, could you please respond this package of questions and then we shall start the next round.
So the first question about the common symbol for the state and the church, this is the Russian people, Русский народ. You know, because this is a very good uniting idea that it is a very strong, heroic nation. So this is the most important thing, I think. What comes to next year? Next year it is 2018. I think it is at the same time the anniversary. 19. What will be 19?
What is the one symbol for the next year?
I don't know if in 19. I think now the symbol, the most important symbol for the end of 18 and the beginning of 19. This will be the topic of the murder of the Tsar's family.
That is true. I know that.
Yeah.
But it's always curious to know what is the next.
Yes. Well, let's see.
Maybe there will be a gap year, you know, no commemoration for a whole year for the nation to rest. No, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Same here in Poland. I guess we shall be waiting for 1920 and the Polish Bolshevik War in 1919 going to be Latin. I don't know.
They will try to avoid civil war and more talk about the Tsar, I think. This is my prognostics.
And mine also.
So about minorities, there is a difference between the memory, Russian national memory of the First World War and regional memory. Of course, in the regions, like Muslim regions, for instance, Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, there were discussions about the participation of the Muslim population in the war, because of course they were quite numerous, like 3% of the soldiers were Muslim, and their problematic was different from Russian soldiers because they didn't have the right to speak their own languages, they didn't have the right to have proper food, which corresponded to their religious belief. But it is a very big question, so there is like two things I wanted to say. First of all, in Moscow and St. Petersburg, so the present-day capital of Russia and the former imperial capital of Russia, there was nearly nothing about Muslim peoples in the war. There was really this like Orthodox church, Orthodox faith. Later on, in the new museum of the First World War, they integrated the whole about the Caucasian and other inarodцы, the non-Russian peoples in the war. So they integrated this dimension. But let's say the central national memory, it is a Russian memory and Orthodox memory. Well, the second question is that what is very interesting, that in the regions, the memory of the First World War, it is a conflictual subject. Because the leaders, for instance, of Tatarstan, they do not like the idea that the Muslim population was patriotic and devoted to the Tsar. They want to see them more like an opposition, like dreaming of the national autonomy, you know. So it is a very conflictual question there, for instance, to create or not create the monument to the veterans of the First World War, like to the First World War. Music. So during the centenary, of course, the music was used. It was the music of the period of the First World War. The marches, patriotic music, Прощание славянки, like farewell, a beautiful Slavic woman, and so on, this music. And it was very often in the museums also. Also, there were like God Save the King, and some exhibitions I have heard. Боже, царя храни. But it was more like military music. Then Putin. So Putin's participation was very important in the centenary of the First World War because this year coincided with the Ukrainian conflict. So Putin used the centenary to explain to the population the sense of the Ukrainian conflict. So I didn't have the time to talk about that, but I know that his speech was 3 or 4 times rewritten. It was a very conceptual speech that he pronounced on the 1st of August on the Mount Poklonna Gora in Moscow at the opening of the monument. And there he presented the new vision of the history of that war. And so it was his citation that the victory was stolen. And his speech was constructed in all very heroic, like military heroic rhetorics, as usual. Thank you.
I probably would answer for the same questions. So about the question of what will be the next jubilee and what will be the next event when we'll celebrate Russia in the future, hard to say. I only know that it will be something positive. So probably the creation of the Soviet Union, for instance, so 100 of Soviet Union, I don't know. So maybe there's some event more natural for the political life, so it could be some jubilees of the like Leo Tolstoy 100 years or something, I think that's really the Russia have a long history, and you always may choose whenever you like to celebrate. About music, I actually don't know. So that was in a liturgy, so that's of course it uses the sounds, you know, and very specific, and it's again. I think that's the most the calendar and the most the dates and event which was prepared the hierarchy of the Russian Orthodox Church to how to participate in such jubilees was really more looking for the one target group for believers, and then of course the Patriarch participated in some state event, but I think that the most the idea of this it's not a commemoration event was more for churches for believers, and they have two different committees. The one is the state committee, which was prepared the event, which was mostly the exhibition about the revolution. It was most about the conference with the historians discussion and so on, and the committee which was organized in a clear of the Russian Orthodox Church, they have their own ideas and their own events and their own calendar, which really detected to their the special the church events. And in a time to time, I would say that it's of course there now the both conception of this jubileum, they have the common places, but it's still not really equal projects. It's my point. And about the participation, about the role of Putin in event. Yes, as I shows in a few photos, the president supported some events in a different way, just to visited some important things, or just invite participants of the conference, for instance, or like in a Day of Memory with Medinsky and some important people from the Russian government, who make speeches and strongly support it. I feel that there's some parallels, and it shows that the Russian authority have a huge sympathy to the project of the Russian Orthodox Church. But they have in nowadays I see that it's still a bit different, and they still have a different auditorium of the different groups for which commemorate this jubileum. And about the secularization concept, I think that it's absolutely clear that now the Russian Orthodox Church, and I'm working with the speeches of the Patriarch, and I'm working with the high level of the Russian Orthodox Church. They try to desecularize this event, and they try to, and they openly say that yes, it's a catastrophe for the culture and for the country, and they wanted to find some things like an Orthodox faith which helps to make the one line, from the pre-revolution at the time to the future. And this concept of a new martyrs, it's helps a lot, because it's not every country was just in the Soviet. So the idea was that it is in some heroes who helps to Russia back to this to the right way to the God, if you wish. So, but I fully agree with the concept of desecularization. Yeah.
Okay, so we still have time for 2 or 3 really brief questions. You will have to choose. I'm sorry.
There is a queue already.
Just my question is, I'm wondering if the binary of the religious and secular fits really well in the people's practice of remembrance, because secularization always has an implication of re-enchantment. For example, Panthéon, after the French Revolution, or deism, is a good example to show how the secular can accommodate the religious in its new form. So I mean that this binary of the secular and religious sometimes look like a little bit exaggerated what really people used to practice. For example, how can I say that the desecularization also, the concept? I mean, this, if you have a look at the May 1st parade, always they borrow the form of Christian march, right? Christian procession in the funeral. That sort of forms always borrowed by the socialists from the late 19th century and so on. So if we have a look at the secularization or secular memory also, we should not deny the possibility that the secular memory also accommodate the religious memory. So desecularization, in a sense, also, really secularization has an implication of, how can I, secularizing religiosity, right? So you can use the Max Weber's very good binary of the Entzauberung and Wiederzauberung. Modernity always means disenchantment, but disenchantment also implies re-enchantment. So this desecularization, yes, it looks like a desecularization, but also under that current, we can see certain continuity between the religious memory and the secular memory. So desecularization, in a sense, also get along with the certain re-enchantment in the different forms, even in the secular forms. That's my comment like this.
Thank you. Two comments. One, very brief comments. One about the patriarch and another one about Putin. On the patriarch, now he said last year that the revolution was a tragedy, the great tragedy. But 3 years ago, he was saying a different thing. He was trying to bring together the entire history, millennial history of Russia, split it into 5 periods. And, the early Rus, the imperial Rus, Russia, then revolution, then Soviet Union, and then post-Soviet. So, and he was trying to assign to each of these periods some kind of positive thing. So, and he was trying to say that revolution was the expression of the Russian people's thrust to social justice. So that was, and the Soviet Union was the period of solidarity, experiencing this solidarity. So there was this kind of, attempt to bring all together, this kind of continuity and to find this kind of stuff. In 3 years after that, he says that revolution is tragedy, let's say. And about Putin and the political regime, I'm sure that like Professor Kwiatkowski said, there was no official position or agenda by the political elite. And I believe that today's Russia political elite doesn't like revolution. Guess why?
Thank you. I'll try and make my comments even briefer. Just from a comparative perspective, have you looked at all at Serbia? Because it is such a rich field of memory studies, particularly around the First World War. It fits into Serbian martyrdom, messianism, the huge losses of Serbia, much higher than any other combatant in the First World War, and the very interesting little bit of amnesia that more or less they started the damn thing in the first place. But it would be a very, very rich field. If you would like to do some sort of comparative study, I'll leave it at that.
I have 2 questions to both panelists. The first one, I wonder whether when you were talking about the representation, the idea of the unity of the united people, the Russian people, so have you realized any mentions of the Russian world and the idea of the katechon? Because this is very important in terms of Russian conservative project, and whether you mentioned, realized any mentions of these two concepts, the Russian world and the idea of katechon. And the second question is about the position of Russian Orthodox Church as seen from current perspective. Because of this memory of this precarious position during the Bolshevik time, have you realized any attempts to erase this memory or present this like a kind of any reconceptualization of this time? So to raise the understanding that time as a precarious position of Russian Orthodox Church now.
Okay, so I think now we have time to answer the questions.
No, it's more not question, but just some remarks. And I agree with Alexander that the Patriarch have a different point. So it was not just in one clear way how to express, how to explain this time. And it's like in a revolution, it's not just one event, so it's a chain of different things with the political life and the cultural life, and it's many of things that you may find like everywhere, like in any history, you may find whatever you like. And for us, for me, was interesting how that's going this in a transformation. So the idea of unity, that was also not a creation of this jubileum years. So that's President Yeltsin, if I remember, he was actually who started to mention that it should be something about unity, and it would be nice. And the День народного единства, it's actually also so before this time. And this the authority and the hierarchy that just played with this term, and they played with this idea. And it's also, on the one hand, it's of course they present it as the revolutionary as a tragedy and like a cruel event in a history. On the other hand, it's actually the time when this the church in the Sretensky monastery was open. It was very symbolical time, so it was in the day of Вознесения. So that's an idea was to present it as a celebration, like in a very good event. So it's again like in something. Yes, it wasn't persecution, but on the other hand, without this persecution, the church never will glorified after this. So this something which gave the Russians a good feeling in the end. So we are chosen by God, so this is an idea. So this is why this interpretation is so nice for many Russians. They wanted to feel the positive things from the whole history, and not just to be proud in the winning in some war. So this is why I find that's why this idea and interpretation is such attractive in the modern Russia for many people. And about katechon, I just wanted to say I don't know. So sorry. So probably it's a quite specific term, and for me it's really hard to even try to answer. And about sacralization, it's and desacralization. As a person who is working with the Soviet project, so the main topic was about how the Soviet Union created the memory. So, and my book actually it's about how was made the memory about siege of Leningrad without the religion connotation, because it was in a time when it was officially no religion, and I find that's. The Soviet project, it's not just in the continuity from the religion. Of course, they choose and they took a lot from the many things. But on the other hand, I also think that they rethinking this old heritage in an other way. So, and in my point, this part of the Soviet project, its influence for the nowadays in the modern Russia, no less than that some religion aspect. Moreover, I believe that it's a creation of religion for Russia now, and but nevertheless, so this Soviet project and the Soviet concept of memory, it's still going on, and it's still is in jubilees, in books, in a presentation of the different sides of memory in Russia. So I would say that it's not just in one way. So that's really a lot of conflicts of these different projects. So if I correctly to understand your remarks.
My point is political religion or civil religion. One may understand Marxism and nationalism as a sort of civil or secular religion. Then you can understand the relationship between the religious memory and secular memory in a different way. Little bit. No.
Do you have something to say?
Oczywiście.
So I would like just at the end to stress this question regarding music. And I think that in many celebrations, just overwhelmed by various emotions, like First World War celebrations in Russia, music plays an incredibly important role. And empirical sociological research regarding memory of 1918 in Poland brought us to the conclusion that the most important, I would say, cultural symbols, very important for, I would say, emotions regarding 1918 are soldiers' songs from the First World War. And majority of Polish people know at least one or two such songs, and they are very popular because way of celebrating, contemporary way of celebrating, is sometimes less official than in the past, and a lot of common meetings, parades, and common singing sessions are taking part in Poland.
Thank you very much for this remark, and I'm afraid we're running out of time, so that was actually the conclusion of our panel. Please join me in thanking our panelists.